Welcome to High Impact Practices, HIPS, implementing HIPS for momentum and for equity. You'll see as you come in, we have a poll just to give a little understanding of the audience that we're talking to today. So please do your part in the poll. Let us know who's here, and we will give you a minute or two to address that. Wanted to let you all know as we're finishing up the poll here that this meeting on high impact practices for momentum is being recorded. So if you know others that are not able to be here today at this time, or if you want to review the presentation at a later time, you will be able to. We'll get those links to you. All right. Okay, I think we've gotten a good chunk of our audience. Let's see who we have. A lot of administration, some advising, CETL, faculty. Good to see all the faculty here. A little bit of student affairs and others. You know, one thing I want everyone to know here today that we have participating is our faculty implementation teams from each campus for HIPS. We'll speak a little bit more about them later, but these folks are our A team on each campus to help make certain that HIPS are high impact and that they are focused on our momentum goals and also on equity. So thank you very much for letting us know a bit about yourselves. All right. So this is Momentum Summit, our first Momentum Summit virtually. And we are today going to speak, as I said, about high impact practices for momentum, how they relate to momentum, and also for equity itself. And my name is Robert Todd, Assistant Vice Chancellor, Student Success and Completion. I'll be your host for the very beginning of this meeting from the University System of Georgia. Also, we have with us Bruce Van Dahl, who
It looks like we might have lost Robert for a second. So we are also, as Robert, this is Jonathan Watsall. I'm the Director for Student Success. And as we wait for Robert to come back online, we're joined by, so here's our agenda for today. We're also joined by Bruce Van Dahl. I was hoping to, so Bruce Van Dahl, who's been joining us. We have today's agenda. We're going to go over briefly what is the USG HIPS initiative for momentum, and talk about what the LEAP collaboration is. LEAP Georgia is, and so some of this will be review for some of y'all, and new for others, and we're excited about that. And then what are some real world examples of scaling that? So I'm gonna,
Jonathan, I'm happy to kind of jump in.
I was gonna say, Bruce, if you could send me a link. This is, you know, there are very few sessions at which I am not going to be able to lead at the fly. So I'm going to hand it off to Bruce Van Dahl to give us a bit more detail on that. Thanks you so much, Bruce.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. And I'm hoping that that Robert will be able to join us in a second, but I'll do my best to kind of step in for him in the meantime. So we want to just provide you a brief overview of the work that's going on before we jump in with some really helpful, I think, and thoughtful presentations from some of the leaders across the system who are doing really meaningful work around HIPS. So first of all, if you're not familiar with what high impact practices are or HIPS are, we have been, the system has been working to implement HIPS through a variety of initiatives that have been guided by the work of the American Association of Colleges and Universities. some of you may be familiar with their LEAP initiative, which you'll hear more about in a few minutes. And part of that is, of course, the focus on implementing high impact practices. They're teaching and learning practices that have been widely tested and shown to be beneficial for college student success. We're seeing them, of course, implemented across the country, and AAC&U have been using them as a mechanism to drive professional development opportunities. You may be familiar with sort of the 11 AAC&U HIPs. And these are the sort of strategies that we're hoping to see implemented and scaled across the system as part of the USG strategic plan initiative, as well as the larger initiative that we'll be talking about more today. Some of these might be very familiar to you, like undergraduate research, first year experience, which many of you are doing. Some of them maybe not so much, but our goal is to be, again, to see progress across the system with each of these HIPs over the course of the next year or two, ideally looking at the next couple of years. And so the work here is focused on these and potentially more as we think about what are indeed high impact practices and how they can be deployed in classrooms across the system. In addition to those 11 specific HIPs, HIPs actually underneath each of those HIPs are a set of teaching and learning principles that we think are critical to actually delivering them in the most high quality way possible. The example we love to share is around, say, service learning. Service learning isn't necessarily a HIP just because you're offering service learning. It has to have key elements within it that actually demonstrate that the quality of learning and instruction that are happening associated with the strategy actually do meet the goals of what a HIPs are. I won't go through these in too much depth, but you can begin to see here what we mean by that. Obviously, many of these are sort of common and recognized practices of high quality instruction in a classroom. And the idea here is to ensure that if you construct or build a HIP that you're implementing, that it includes, if not all of these elements, many of these elements to demonstrate that the learning that's happening in these classrooms is of the sufficient quality that meets that standard. The system has been working on the implementation of high impact practices. Of course, there's been work happening organically and at the grassroots for a long time. Through the leadership of the Leaf State Georgia group, or maybe within your own institution, you may have been doing a lot of work related to HIPs already. But in terms of a system-wide initiative, this began in 2018 with a grant from the National Association of System Heads, where the system worked with 6 Vanguard institutions that were asked to develop strategies to expand access to high impact practices with a particular focus on increasing equitable access and participation in high impact practices. And so those institutions worked on strategies and plans to actually accomplish that objective. Meanwhile, at the system level, we worked across the different institutions to develop mechanisms and tools and instruments to help other institutions begin to assess their own capacity and current activities related to HIPs. That includes a taxonomy that is really a self-study instrument that allows institutions to look at how well or where they're at in terms of the scaling of HIPs at their institution. We're doing work around data, in particular, creating new codes and attributes to be included in Banner so that we can track the implementation of HIPs, not only across the system, but within your own institution. And so we suggested if you want to learn more about HIPs and all of that, we can go to Nash Online to learn more about that project. But these are this work that started in 2018 that are the building blocks of the current work that we're doing now. So we are now, where are we at now? We are now working at a status, we're at a place now where we're working with institutions. We've identified a set of implementation team leaders, about 4 to 6 within each institution, that are going to be working system-wide to continue the work around planning and implementation, the implementation of HIPs at scale, ensuring, of course, that those HIPs are sufficiently of high impact and ensure equity. Empower and contribute to your larger student momentum efforts, facilitate smooth transition to reliable tracking of this information in Banner, And obviously, a critical part of that is to tap the knowledge and experience that exists within the system and within the system's institutions, to do what we can to share best practices, knowledge, and wisdom around how to effectively not just implement individual HIPs, but how to develop an institution-wide strategy for implementing and scaling HIPs at your institution. As I mentioned a moment ago, the way that we've done that is by investing in faculty and other leaders at all 26 system institutions to really begin to develop strategies for themselves and with their colleagues for the implementation of HIPs. And the idea here is that we're going to see meaningful progress in terms of building capacity within each of those institutions to continue to offer HIPs and to expand access to those HIPs. In a moment, you're going to hear from leaders from Leap State, Georgia, a critical partner and collaboration that the system has engaged in to really build and tap the capacity that exists within the system and within institutions to offer their perspective and support to other faculty in terms of technical assistance, guidance, some professional development on how to design and deliver high impact practices. And part of that will be some workshops that we'll be holding this spring. And then lastly, we're working on a dashboard that will allow for a fairly straightforward, customized, easily sort of a user-friendly mechanism to allow institutions to start to code and track their HIPs within their institutions. And so the idea here is that instead of building something that's sort of dependent completely on your registrar's office, how can we build something that can empower others to simply add data into Banner that will make it easier for us to track HIPs across the system. And so that's something that we'll be rolling out later on this spring. Robert, are you back, by the way? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I think
Okay. Robert, are you there? I know he's having a little bit of an echo there. Okay, I'm going to keep on moving.
no, I think I'm back, Bruce, but I don't know whether you can hear me.
I can hear you now. Great. I'm going to hand it off to you to finish us up on the next step.
Wow, hold on. Let me cancel this out of my computer. There we go. I am not a cat, everyone. That's all I can say. Anyway, I don't know if you can even see me because I'm using the iPad now as a backup. Computer failure here. So wanted to follow up. Bruce, thank you so much for getting us moving here and helping everyone understand what we're doing and how we're doing it. I wanted to give an example of the initiative objectives, and this is just really one. And that objective is to expand equitable access to and participation in high impact practices and related experiential learning opportunities for students enrolled at the USG. One of the success metrics for this, but an important one, is the increase in the number of student enrollments in experiential learning. And that's part of our strategic plan for the USG. And we're looking at a change in courses so that we have 150,000 in fiscal year 2024. I think that the work that we're doing with HIPs is going to help move us in that direction very deliberately. Next slide. So one way to look at how our work here has fit into the momentum approach, because we wanted from the beginning to make certain it was not a standalone initiative, as we've said, is to figure out where are the connections and how do HIPs fit into momentum as a larger entity. So in 2018, as we began this work and we began our project with NASH TS3, we started thinking, well, what are the elements that would do that, and what elements would make certain that this is a part of the larger goal. So we have a systemic vision for integrating high impact practices into the USG momentum approach. And this is just a short and sweet version of it. So you can see that we support faculty's essential roles in generating student info, That leads to designing and delivering high impact practices and courses, looking at items such as the AAC&U 8 critical course elements of high impact practices that Bruce showed you just a couple of minutes ago. This moving into investing institutional capacity to scale HIPS campus-wide. And that's part of the HIPS reports that will be inside our momentum plans this year, tracking HIPS in Banner, and the use of the taxonomy that we've created with faculty members to help everyone understand what really is a HIP and what is not so much. And this then leads us to measuring impact and scaling effective practice system-wide. If we don't understand what the data is, if we don't understand how to measure it, and we can't capture it, we can't have some consistency, then we're not necessarily going to be certain that we're moving the dial. And then that leads us back again with the data to supporting faculty's essential role. And the data can tell us where it is we need to focus more on the tools and the processes that the faculty need to have in order to make all of this a reality. So it's an iterative process. That was in 2018, and we began with some of the initiatives, sub-initiatives that you see listed. Bruce, if you would let's move to the next slide. Then we can look at 2021, and you can see it hasn't changed in its heart. We're using the same iterative process, but there's certain issues that have changed, such as now for supporting faculty's essential role, we have our HIPS implementation teams. There probably isn't really time for applause here, but we have 111 of these faculty implementation leaders in each of the USG institutions, in general for each of the institutions. And these guys really do deserve a round of applause, and I'll make sure that we get that at some point. But these folks are new as of this academic year, and they are in many ways the vanguard faculty that are helping to make these the scaling of HIPS approaches to be a part of the institution that will be ongoing and will hopefully become a part of the institution culture. And then a few other things that you could see in the graphic that have changed, such as now the USG Leap State Georgia Alliance supporting implementation and scale of HIPS, and then moving around the circle, integrating those HIPS into momentum plans, and identifying and qualifying and coding HIPS in our Banner student implementation system. And again, it moves around in an iterative fashion.
It's like we might have lost Robert again. So I'm going to jump in one more time and fill in to keep us moving forward. So you can see the evolution that's occurred over the last 3 years and the capacity and infrastructure that's being built. And that's really what we want to feature today, is what we're doing in terms of our partnerships and our work across the system right now to implement this design and this systemic approach to scaled implementation of HIPS across the system. So here are some of the things that we are working on now that's sort of part of that systemic approach in terms of the structural tools that Robert was referencing. So of course, part of our objective today is to encourage and facilitate the incorporation of high impact practices within your momentum plans. So to the extent that you see the implementation of scale of HIPS as part of what you're doing to improve student momentum and sustain that over the course of a student's program of study, that's really a key objective of what we're trying to communicate today, that you can work with your HIPS implementation team members to achieve that. Obviously, to begin to use some of the tools that we're talking about here, we'll be working with institutions on doing and helping them with their self-assessment of where they are using the taxonomy, ensuring that what we're doing in terms of implementation is of sufficient quality, right? When we're talking about equity, we're talking about, it's not simply about expanding access, but it's ensuring that the delivery and instruction of these HIPS is done at the highest possible level. So what can we do to support faculty and institutions to build their capacity to study their own data and understand how well their implementation of HIPS is going, and provides assistance to ensure that that occurs. And of course, as we've mentioned already, is a key part of that is beginning to track data within Banner on participation and success of students based on the fact of whether or not they participated in a high impact practice. And I think Robert is back with us again. So I'm going to pause and let him pick us up and take us into the panels here in a minute. Robert, are you there?
I'm beginning to think. I'm beginning to think that Robert being with us again is more of a problem than a help. So I apologize for all this. So if you can hear me now, all right, as I've gotten rid of the iPad version of this, I'll move forward quickly because I want to make sure our featured speakers have a chance to do what they need to do here. So we do have structural tools for institutional scaling. That is a breakout from that piece that I just showed you of our iterative process. And these include HIPS and institutional momentum plans, utilizing the taxonomy for equitable learning, ensuring HIPS high impact practices versus low impact practices, and integrating HIPS attributes in a Banner student information system. These are critical parts that we're hoping to get a partial result on this semester. We realize that all these teams can't finish this work in one semester, but we're asking our faculty implementation teams to focus on these issues so that we can at least get the structures in place, so that by the time that we begin fall of 2021, we'll be in a good place to complete these integrations. All right, next slide. And last, I want to say that we have for faculty leaders. This is through the university system, but also through our LEAP Georgia collaboration, which you're about to hear more about. These include webinars and other supports for designing and delivering HIPS. We've begun those. The first of these was the one with the wonderful title, HIPS versus LIPS, which is catchy, but it also was critical information for understanding what really is high impact and what makes the course not so much. And resources and tools for ensuring equitable access to HIPS. LSG is working with us along with our other faculty to assess and qualify courses. With institutional teams, the teams are critical at this point to create a process so that each campus has a smooth and reliable way of providing what is a HIP and what is not, and how to identify the data for those HIPs. Guidance on reporting the HIPS data and using taxonomies to review the capacity of institutions, and also the cultural focus for each campus so that they know which HIPs to focus on. And just-in-time resources from LSG and USG HIPS leaders and our related professionals from CETL, for example. Next slide. So with that in mind, a couple minutes over, but we'll make it up. LEAP Georgia, we have our leaders from LEAP who are our collaborative partners, and I'm going to let them take it away and say a little bit about what LEAP is doing to help ensure equitable and powerful HIPS for momentum.
Thanks, Robert. This is Jordan Kofer. I'm the president-elect for LEAP State Georgia. And really what I want to do is just turn it over to Michael Crafton, who has really been the driving force behind LEAP State Georgia and the reason why Georgia is recognized as a LEAP state.
So does that mean now? Good morning, everyone. Greetings, and thank you for participating in this and being a part of this. I'm very excited about it. My name is Michael Crafton, and you may wonder why I'm here talking to you and what right do I have to talk to you. And I'll say that I have retired from the USG this past June after nearly 4 decades of service, both as a faculty member in the English departments and as an administrator, particularly most recently provost at University of West Georgia. Also, and provost at Clayton State. So I'll give a shout out to Clayton State University. And I was a part of the LEAP project since its inception. So and I've been excited to be a part of it for all of that time and continue. But now I am a senior fellow with AAC&U, and in my role, part of my role is to be a liaison between AAC&U and the LEAP State Georgia Steering Committee, which I'm very proud to be a part of. And in that role, what I do is relay developments, good news that we have in Georgia up to the vice presidents at AAC&U in DC, and then I relay information from them back down here. So today, the members of the steering committee asked me to provide just a little bit of historical background on these concepts. Now, some of you may have heard this before. If you were at the February 19th meeting, you heard it before, and I apologize in advance, but it will be brief. And at the end of my comments, I'm going to post a number of web links so you can look at the various AAC&U documents, ones that have been mentioned already, but some that haven't that I'll mention, and then we'll move on. So 3 concepts I want to touch on. LEAP is one, LSG is the other, and finally momentum. With LEAP, and I just want to briefly give a background, AAC&U, or the American Association of Colleges and Universities, is one of the oldest higher ed associations in the country. It came together in 1915, then known as AANC, or AAC, with 150 founding members, institutional members, and placed as part of their initial documents the terms inclusiveness and interhelpfulness. Interhelpfulness is a 1915 term. You don't see that much anymore. But the idea being that they want to bring institutions together and students together and faculty together to achieve quality education. In the early years, AAC&U focused primarily on smaller liberal arts colleges, but over time realized that these same principles applied to state schools for sure, and even applied to very large schools. In 2005, they came up with the LEAP project. And the LEAP project, in many ways, is a kind of coalescence of that desire to take those, what you might associate with smaller liberal arts colleges, to larger and state public institutions. LEAP stands for Liberal Education and America's Promise. And so we'll need to touch on those terms for just a bit, and then we'll move on to LEAP State Georgia. So liberal education, to use the term liberal, and liberal on the one hand connects with liberal arts. There's a long, centuries-old tradition of liberal arts education, and that we associate again with some smaller private schools, but much of that is included in liberal education. However, liberal education is more inclusive than that, and includes more of the sciences, more technology, is more contemporary and inclusive than what we associate with liberal arts. The term liberal also refers to an education that is liberated from the constraints of politics, constraints of religion, and the constraints of even a major or professional goal. The notion of a liberal general education is it's a quality education for all majors, for all people. And it is something that a thing we need to, I guess, remark on is that often, particularly with some of our community stakeholders, when we talk about liberal education, we'll get a frown. And sometimes that frown, or that sort of tortured expression, has to do with mistaking the idea of liberal education with liberal politics. And I just want to push this point, and I know you know it already, but that properly conceived and properly executed, a liberal education is the exact opposite of a political education. The second half of the term, LEAP, America's Promise, refers to what we might call as the final or ultimate goal of a quality education. And that's to prepare students for a successful career, a productive and active civic life, and to lifelong learning. And to that end, AAC&U does a survey every now and then. The last one was 2018, I believe, of about 500 CEOs and hiring managers, asking them what they look for in their graduates that they hire. And it should come as no surprise that, lo and behold, most of what they look for are the qualities of a liberal education. And those qualities are laid out in a set of learning outcomes called the essential learning outcomes. So I'll close my comment about LEAP by saying that the LEAP project is very much about HIPS, but it is also a more comprehensive project for quality education. And it is bookmarked or framed by these two sets of goals. One set is essential learning outcomes, and that's exactly what it is. What are the learning outcomes for a quality general education? Includes all areas. The other set's what's called principles of excellence. And the principles of excellence are the goals for the institution. These are the things the institution should do to help make a quality education possible. Number one in the 7 principles of excellence is to make excellence inclusive, an equity imperative that is very much at the heart of what we're doing with the HIPS Alliance. Finally, I would mention AAC&U has developed a number of tools working with faculty groups, the value rubrics being one, and several others which you can look at on their websites. Now, Leap State Georgia, or LSG. Many faculty, and I think Bruce mentioned this and Robert mentioned this, many faculty have been working on high impact practice things or LEAP things for several years. I got started on this when I was provost at Clayton State and got the institution interested in LEAP in 2010. And we sent a team to AAC&U High Impact Practice Institute to develop our undergraduate research program there at Clayton State. By 2012, several of us at USG institutions were convinced that these LEAP goals were good ones, and we started meeting regularly and exchanging ideas at the Spring Teaching and Learning Conference in Athens. And it was there that we started talking about the notion of a LEAP state. And then in 2013, Chief Academic Officer Houston Davis and I went to an AAC&U meeting on LEAP states to be kind of presented with the possibility of it. And we both thought it was a good thing and started working toward it. In 2016, we applied for that. And in June of that year, we were awarded the 13th LEAP state. And what that means is that AAC&U recognized that there was a critical mass of institutions in Georgia that were moving toward these similar and applaudable goals. Now, finally, I'll touch on momentum for just a piece. Most of you know most about this and have heard lots about the Momentum Year project started in 2017 and how that developed into Momentum Approach. And Momentum Approach is very much like LEAP in that it is pushing for or has as its primary goal improving the quality of education all around, from first year to last year. That is all undergraduate education. And in so doing is like LEAP. And also in so doing shares the notion that if we improve the quality of education, we may well also improve retention and progression and get students completed. Just as the Momentum Year's primary goal was to get students through that first year, the primary goal of Momentum Approach is to get them to graduation. And so one place where LEAP and Momentum overlap utterly is the place of HIPS. And the HIP developments that's gone on at ACNU and what's gone on with the NASH project in the USG, I think is one of the most profound projects going on in the country today. So I would say that if we look at the 5 areas in Momentum Approach, just closing comment, you'll see that the 4th area is the area that is most often formally associated with HIPS, and that's the one called heightening academic engagement. But I would say that HIPS could also drive or reinforce all 5 of the areas of Momentum Approach. And therefore, in my view, the alliance that's developing between USG and Leap State Georgia is a brave one, a bold one, and a historic one, and one that, as you might imagine, I'm very proud to bear witness to. And now I shall turn my Zoom mic back over to Jordan.
Actually, we want to have Brian Etheridge say something quickly.
Yeah, and I'll be very brief. Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Etheridge, and this year I have been serving in the role as the conference organizer. And despite the pandemic, it's really been an outstanding year to serve in this role because we have developed this partnership with USG to support HIPS across the state. So I was going to say more about the Alliance, but I want to give time to our campuses to talk about what they're doing. So I just want to say very briefly where we are, where we stand right now in terms of our support for HIPS implementation team members. Robert made allusion to the HIPS versus LIPS presentation that was crafted by Susan Rock at Columbus State, Laura Lynch at Coastal Georgia, and Denise Domizzi at the USG a couple of weeks ago. And that really just kind of gave faculty some broad ways to think about how we might distinguish a high impact practice from one that we think is one, but actually is low impact. So that was an important first step in working with faculty to identify what should really count. Our next step is that we're going to be offering HIP specific workshops over the course of the next several weeks to aid in the work of these HIP implementation teams. So far, we've recruited representatives from North Georgia, Augusta, Columbus State, UGA, Georgia College, Georgia Tech, West Georgia, and Kennesaw State to deliver workshops on undergraduate research, service learning, and work-based learning. And these were the HIPs in highest demand according to the survey that was distributed to the implementation team members last month. They'll be receiving more details on the dates of these workshops in the next several days. And just on behalf of the rest of my colleagues at LSU, I want to say how excited we are about this collaboration with USG, and we see this as only the first of several concrete initiatives that we can undertake to support the efforts of our faculty and staff, providing even more meaningful and relevant educational experiences to students across the state of Georgia. Thank you.
So I'd like to introduce now our featured speakers for two of our institutions. These are examples of how HIPs are working with momentum, scaling, and expanding their capacity to provide high impact and transformative experiences for students across the state. Georgia College and State University is going to be followed here by Jordan Kofer, Associate Provost for Transformative Learning Experiences, Dana Gorzelny-Mostak, who is the Associate Professor of Music, and Christopher Clark, Professor of Economics. After that, we will have Kennesaw State University with Danielle Buer, Executive Director of Institutional Quality and Accreditation, Michele Di Pietro, Executive Director of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, and Scott Reese, Assistant Dean, College of Science and Mathematics. I want to thank both of these institutions and their faculty for coming here today to show us in the real world how we can see these HIPs become a greater part of momentum and success for students at a more scaled state. So please take it away, Georgia College and State University, and we're looking forward to hearing from both of you.
Hi, I'm Jordan Kofer.
I'm Dana Gorzelany-Mostak.
And we've got Chris Clark also with us. Just because we're running a little behind already, could we go ahead and we'll skip the next slide? There's a chat question, but we'll go ahead and move past that. So go to the next slide. Thanks. Okay, so GC Journeys is a high impact practices initiative that started at Georgia College, and I'll just go over kind of the basics, and if you want to learn more, you can attend our AAC&U webinar on March 4th coming up. But essentially what happened was we had a group of faculty go attend the AAC&U High Impact Practices Institute in Oklahoma. They came back and really were inspired by this. There was a group of faculty that formed called the Liberal Arts Renewal Project, or LARP. And they spent about a year doing town halls, meeting with department chairs, deans, administration got on board. And so out of that was this idea of GC Journeys. And it was the emphasis on all of our students taking 5 high impact practices, but also we've mapped the AAC&U essential learning outcomes to our core curriculum. So the reason we chose 5 high impact practices is that a lot of the research is showing, whether it's the Finney McNair study or the Ku O'Donnell HIPs at 10 study, they're showing that on average, students are taking about 1.3 high impact practices. So between 1 and 2 during their college career. And we really wanted to ramp that up and ramp up the benefits of high impact practices. So what we've done is we've embedded 3 high impact practices in each degree program. And then we ask students to choose 2 high impact practices. So this has been a real campus-wide effort. It's, all departments, but it's also, advising. They created course maps for different majors. And certain departments have actually kind of mapped these in. You'll hear from the economics department. Nursing, they have it where all their students are doing 6 high impact practices. And it's already kind of built into the way, whereas others, you do 3, and then we're asking those students to choose 2 more. All right, next slide. So as you can imagine, our HIPS participation has increased each year. I have to say our registrar's office, like I said, it's a campus-wide initiative, has done this amazing job. We've mapped these courses to, we have our banner, we have these banner tags for our high impact practices. And we've trained department chairs in terms of recognizing the curricular HIPs. With co-curricular HIPs, it's a little more complex, but we're still able to get them into banner. Then our registrars also built out in DegreeWorks a way for students to go in and check, and they're able to see how many of the journey's milestones they've met, how many high impact practices they've met each year. At the same time, we're also working with a software company on developing a customized portal. But it's, this has been a way we've done quality control, working with department chairs. We also do a lot of faculty development around HIPs. But then we're also able to do a lot with tracking our HIPs. Next slide. Another major concern for us, especially when we started GC Journeys, was equity. Do students get equitable access to these HIPs? If we're asking all students to do 5, would they have access to it? So we were lucky to be a part of the, it's already been mentioned, the NASH, the National Association of System Heads, Taking Success to Scale grant. So what we did is we took our grant money, worked with another institution, and we designed a self-study to measure how our underserved students, their access to high impact practices. And it's much more complex than just one slide, but the data was really helpful and helped us to design some specific interventions for these students. What we found, so for instance, as you can see here, a lot of our underrepresented students are being able to participate at the same rates, or even in some ways higher, except for study abroad, for instance. There it's clearly much less, especially on the Pell eligible. So we were able to work with the Provost office on a specific scholarship for study abroad. Next slide. Another big aspect is, especially in thinking of the quality of high impact practices, has been assessment. We've worked a lot with our IR and IE offices. We've designed multiple assessments to measure our high impact practices. We also have program assessment. This is just an image. We were lucky to be a part of the Indiana University HIPS Quality Survey, or HIPS Quality Study. And that was really helpful for us because we were able to get a lot of internal data at our own high impact practices. But then we were also able to look at comparative peers and how we stack up nationally in these HIPs. Same with our NESI data. That's been really helpful for us. We've seen, and we thought this, but we've seen, we're exceeding all 3 peer groups in terms of HIPS participation. And then even, looking at, our incoming students are pretty much on par with all of our comparator peer groups, but then they leave exceeding these groups in 5 different areas, which I think speaks to the quality and impact these HIPs are having. We've also been able to see an increase in GPAs based on HIPS participation. I remember around 2 hips we start seeing some increase, but really around 3 hips is when we saw a lot of benefits. Next slide, please. And I just want to mention a few things. You know, we've seen a 15.3% increase in student participation in HIPS, and this is just for 2019, 2020. We've also been able to increase our engagement with a lot of external bodies, with a lot of other institutions. I think that's been really helpful. A lot of information sharing. You know, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help. But one of the things that having an institution-wide initiative on HIPS is allowed us to do is really deepen the quality of these high-impact practices. We, you know, in terms of service learning, on the participation slide, you may have seen an increase in service learning. We're a Carnegie, we have the Carnegie engagement classification, but we just recently won the Council on Undergraduate Research's award for undergraduate accomplishment, which is a big deal. Winning the Aurora Award was great for us. Florida State won it last year. It's been, I think, Furman, Clemson. So we're the first public liberal arts institution. I don't think a whole lot of schools our size have won that before. So it was you know, speaks well of, you know, the faculty and the undergraduate research initiatives going on. We were able to launch a national journal called Undergraduate Research, and then we won the Momentum Year Award for it's a teaching excellence in teaching and curricular innovation. Next slide. So that's a little bit about the structure, but I'm hoping, I think what's interesting is kind of what an initiative like this has allowed us to do. And it's allowed us to do a lot of experiential learning in different departments, and I think really kind of creates this kind of impact. So for instance, you may have heard on NPR Science Cafe, Dr. Rosada Flores and Dr. Forrest have this partnership, this chemistry and art partnership, where I think it's been 5 years they've worked on just multiple projects each year. So it's chemistry students and art students working on a lot of crossover projects. So one of the examples that I really like, because I'm a Flannery O'Connor scholar, is at Flannery O'Connor's home at the Andalusia Institute, they did pain analysis. So they did, you know, this pain analysis, and then they're able to go in the studio and they're able to come up with that, you know, or match that paint, you know, and do that kind of restoration work. They've done specific work on like a specific color, and then taking it into the studios and doing printmaking with it. They've done multiple projects together, and I think it's a really cool partnership. Next slide. But then there's been a lot of other really, I think, unique models. You'll hear from the Department of Econ on how they've embedded HIPS. Our world languages, one thing they've done is they have a model with a built-in study abroad, where students then do an internship while they're studying abroad. So they do an internship abroad, and then they have that study abroad experience. In our psychology department, they have a big emphasis on undergraduate research. I think almost every professor there has their own lab, and they're doing a lot of different kinds. But like Dr. Chang's lab is really interesting, because they have an empathy project, and it's an ongoing one, where they work with education. And so her undergraduate research students are working with education and with young children, and doing these empathy studies. Health Sciences has this ongoing project where they're doing a study abroad undergraduate research trip to the same area of Belize each year. So each year they're going to the same area, and they're collecting this health data from this community. And so then that becomes this useful data for the community. But yet it's also this great undergraduate research project, because they have multiple years of data. It's Dr. Hunt, our IRB chair. They have multiple years of data, all health data, all from this one community. So I think that's really helpful. Next slide, please. And kind of similar to, you know, world languages, our nursing our nursing program, they have a trip where they will go to the same area of Tanzania, and then those students work in clinics and in the community each year and get this experiential learning, this great experiential learning experience. Physics, they have a really cool service learning project where Dr. Muhammad Duge likes to say that, in physics, undergraduate research is pretty common, but not service learning. So he has his students, they work with the school system, and they, as the research students are explaining these principles to children, and they design these experiments and really try to make physics fun for them. So that's been an ongoing, really cool project. Theater department has a really interesting study abroad to the Czech Republic. It's a study abroad undergraduate research dramaturgy project where they will go and do this work, on some Holocaust research, and then just write plays about it, perform those plays. It's also been really impactful for students. But I think our econ department has set up some really interesting models, and I think you may be interested in hearing how they've embedded HIPS into the department at the department level. So we'll go to the next slide. I'll turn it over to Dr. Clark.
Thank you, Jordan. I'm going to briefly talk to you about the economics program. We have attempted to integrate undergraduate research into the capstone experience by merging two of our courses. So our econometrics course and our senior seminar course now have a continuous undergraduate research component. So in the econometrics course, they build sort of 3 steps on the way to a full paper, getting feedback at every step. And then once they hit senior seminar, they merge those 3 pieces into a paper, get to revise it into something that's relatively final, presented at national conferences. For example, the ladies you see in the image there are presenting at the Academy of Economics and Finance Conference. 2 people in that image are in PhD programs, and one of them won the Outstanding Undergraduate Research Award. The students take ownership of the entire project. They choose their own topic. They collect their own data. They do their own analysis just with feedback coming from us. We've found that it's increased the percentage of kids who are interested in grad school that end up in PhD programs, especially among women, which is a scarce thing in economics if you know the field at all. We went from 1 student having won an award for undergraduate research to 6 students in the last 6 years winning awards in undergraduate research. We've mentioned scalability a few times this morning. I'd like to also mention that this program is designed to be scalable. Every single one of our econ majors do this. And I know there are a lot of other programs on campus that do a lot of undergraduate research in capstone. But we actually published an article about this in an economics journal. I'll put the link in the chat that actually describes how this could be scaled to larger econ programs if that's something that somebody would like to adopt somewhere. Next slide, please. Now, at the request of some of our students who are very interested in behavioral economics, and as a partnership between the economics department and the psychology department, we developed something called the Georgia College Nudge Unit. You see the logo down at the bottom is just the Georgia College logo nudged to the side. These students are smarter than me. I never would have thought of that. And this has actually proven to be a pretty fruitful relationship. So the students actually identify partners in the community or on campus, and they develop through sort of data collection what they think might be the issues that these organizations need help with. And then using theoretical behavioral economics and applied behavioral economics, they develop potential nudges, and they share what they call a menu of nudges with the client. The client then chooses based on costs, effectiveness, problems they want to target, which ones they want us to implement. We help them implement it, and then they either provide us with data or some sort of feedback, and we provide analysis and sort of a final report. We've done this in 3 forms to this point. One is with Sodexo, which is a French food company that does some service for Georgia College. That project is completed. We used what's called a loss aversion intervention. The results were relatively positive. We have 2 other programs that are ongoing. One is with the Office of Sustainability. I can't tell you about that one because the experiment is happening right now. So I got to keep it secret. I don't want to contaminate, you know how that works. And then the last one is actually with the retention group on campus is trying to increase retention. We have been given data recently. The students are currently hands-on with the data, trying to identify problems and potential nudges. The last thing I would mention is Kendall Lewis is on the screen there. If you know much about Georgia College, you have probably run into her in some way, shape, or form. She's a founding member of the Nudge Unit. She has done incredible undergraduate research. She's currently interviewing for what is in essence a postdoc or postgraduate experience, pre-doc or postgraduate experience at Northwestern University with behavioral economists. She's an example of what these two things together can produce. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm next, and I'm going to begin with a little bit of a straw poll, and I'm going to ask you to use the reactions feature that's on Zoom and give a thumbs up if you remember seeing or hearing one of the following instances of music on the campaign trail. So the first, Bill Clinton playing Elvis on his saxophone on the Arsenio Hall show in 1992. 2, Barack Obama crooning Al Green's Let's Stay Together at the Apollo in 2012. And 3, Donald Trump taking the stage to Queen's We Are the Champions at the 2016 RNC. Let's take a quick look here. Okay. Clearly, a lot of you remember these moments. So over the past decade, I've worked to establish a critical framework for the analysis of popular songs within the context of presidential campaigning to analyze in various case studies how music factors into the formation of candidate identity, party identity, and American identity. In my brief part of the talk today, I'm going to discuss a collaborative project that emerged from this research. So if you could advance to slide 2, please. Tracks of the Trail is a website and research project that tracks, catalogs, and analyzes the soundscapes of U.S. presidential campaigns. With the support of Georgia College and funding from GC Journeys, Tracks on the Trail brings together an international team of experts from the fields of musicology, ethnomusicology, political science, history, sociology, and communications, along with GC undergraduate student researchers. You can advance to slide 3 and go ahead and roll that silent video. The Tracks team publishes essays, interviews, podcasts, educational materials, and research tools on its website with the goal of fostering a more critical evaluation of the ways in which sound and music shape the public's perception of U.S. presidential candidates. The cornerstone of the Tracks on the Trail website is Trail Tracks 2.020, a campaign music database developed and maintained by undergraduate student research assistants at Georgia College. This open access resource allows end users, such as educators, scholars, journalists, and the public, to conduct research or simply broaden their knowledge on this topic. We designed this database with these goals in mind. 1, to provide educators with the requisite knowledge, educational resources, and research tools needed to bring the study of campaign music into their classrooms, fostering the development of media literacy as it pertains to messages communicated through music and sound more broadly. 2, to formulate research that analyzes the role sound plays in branding and marketing 2020 presidential candidates and shaping public opinion. 3, to create a resource that will stimulate research on the topic of campaign music among scholars in diverse fields and generate public interest in the subject. And 4, to establish opportunities for collaboration both within and outside of Georgia College, especially with students and faculty in GIS, computer science, political science, and history. And you could go ahead and advance to slide 4, please. Oh, you could go ahead and advance to slide 4. Oh, sorry. Thank you. High impact practices are embedded in the, just go back one. High impact practices are embedded in the conception and culture of the Tracks on the Trail project. A flexible skill set is demanded of each research assistant who works on the project, and each makes a 2 to 4 year commitment. Tracks research assistants participate in collaborative research projects, which include conference presentations, lectures, outreach activities, and performances, and regularly engage with other scholars, as well as musicians, industry professionals, and educators. Over the past year, research assistants have presented work on music in the national party conventions, candidate-inspired hip-hop, and how to teach campaign music in the high school classroom at the Georgia Music Educators Conference, the GC Undergraduate Research Conference, and GC Alumni Weekend. One student, Haley Strasburger, will be presenting a paper on Taylor Swift's recent political turn at the upcoming National Conference on Undergraduate Research.
Yes, ma'am.
The undergraduate student researchers are also responsible for data collection, analysis, and maintenance for the Trail Tracks database. And while research activities are their primary focus, the students frequently engage in other tasks, which include developing publicity and marketing materials for the website, managing social media, event planning, and fundraising. Over the past 5 years, students working for Tracks on the Trail have built a set of resources and research tools that have really changed the shape of research in the field of music and politics and stimulated research on sound and electoral politics across multiple disciplines. The success of this project is largely due to the support provided by the GC Journeys Initiative and Georgia College's commitment to excellence in student research. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot, everyone. And we'll turn it over to our colleagues from Kennesaw State.
Good afternoon, everybody, or morning. I guess it's still morning. That tells you how long the day is. My name is Scott Reese, and I'm the director of our QEP at Kennesaw State University, and I'm joined today by Michele Di Pietro, who can introduce himself.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Michele Di Pietro. I am the Executive Director of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, also at KSU.
And the program mentioned Danielle Burer, who is our colleague and is our Director for SAC-COC accreditation. She was unfortunately unable to be here today, so we will try and get by without her, but we miss her all the same. So next slide, please. So you guys are all familiar with SAC-COC and its requirements. We all know that in order to be accredited in the SAC-COC realm, we have to have a quality enhancement plan. And so today we're going to talk to you about KSU's quality enhancement plan because it revolves largely around HIP's implementation and the way in which we deal with that process. The QEP is focused on student learning and or student success. Turns out that our QEP, which we call It's About Engagement, which we'll talk about in some detail here later, is about both improving our student learning outcome side and our student success side, specifically revolving around this idea of high impact practices, because high impact practices have a strong compensatory effect on student populations from traditionally underserved communities. And KSU has a large population, right? We're 40,000 students and growing. And that growth is especially apparent in those populations from traditionally underserved spaces. So we have a lot of work to do in order to try and help and make sure that everybody has an experience that can get them through from the beginning to the end. Next slide, please. So we're going to start out talking to you today about the structure of our QEP and the way in which we kind of put it together. And then we'll end with a strong conversation about the way in which we bring faculty along in that space. Next slide, please. So one of the things I need to be very clear on is that we have a distributed model for our QEP. So there's no centralized sort of overarching thou shalt moment that makes everybody do the same thing. Each of our colleges have a role to play, and they have strengths across our different IAE programs, and they should focus in those spaces. And so we've allowed them to build their own plans and to distribute and to focus their efforts wherever it makes sense for them. The central structure, which, I am a director of something called our QEP, is really just about sort of coordinating everything, making sure everybody's sort of doing the same processes, accumulating data, and letting everybody look at that data in ways that make sense so that we can improve going forward. That's really what we're trying to accomplish centrally. We do hold the colleges accountable for progress, but that's, it's progress within whatever focal point they have. Our goals for the It's About Engagement are clearly experiential learning in many respects, right? So we are trying to increase the number of activities, engagement activities that we have available for students. We're trying to increase the number of students taking advantage of those engagement opportunities. It doesn't do well to have lots of engagements if nobody's coming. So we need to make sure that the space is available and the students are taking advantage of them. And then we're trying to improve the quality of those activities. And so that's been our central 3 tenets for our IAE program at KSU. Next slide, please. So one thing that we did is that instead of trying to do all 11 HIPs or find a way to make everything work, we narrowed it down into just those 3 HIPs that we considered experiential learning or strongly engaging HIPs, right? And so we call them our pillars of engagement. And that's internships and their variations, right? Co-ops, any work-based experiences where the students are out in the actual work environment. Undergraduate research, which we have a strong history of and have been a focal point for KSU for a long time, and service learning. So these are the 3 sort of key areas for which we are focused. The rest of the HIPs will come in time, but we have to get our feet under us with these, and so our QEP is largely focused on just these 3 spaces. Next slide, please. So I made these specifically blurred so that you didn't sit here and try and read them in their gory detail. Recognize that in order for this to work, the first thing we have to do is we all have to come to terms with the fact of what these HIPs are. So we spent a considerable amount of time building out what we would call literature-informed definitions of these HIPs, right? And so you've heard from early on in this talk, in this space, the idea that HIPs come with elements, specific elements that have to be included in order to actually make them HIPs, not just titles. So you can't just call your course a service learning course. You've got to actually have the pieces that make it a HIP service learning course and all the rest. So we built definitions. Now we obviously did this before the USG came on board and started trying to build its own taxonomy. So we have all of these things, and there are characteristics associated with every one of them that we require in order to be defined as a HIP structure. And then we had to make a lot of conversations happen. So we had to go around and talk to faculty, administrators, deans, chairs, everybody that we could get in front of and make sure that everybody understood what those definitions were. Turns out it's not enough to create it. You actually have to throw it in front of people's eyeballs and make sure they understand it. So we spent a lot of time and energy just on the front end, making sure that everybody was on the same page for what it meant to be a HIP, an engaged HIP inside of the realm that we live in. I do have a website here for you if you want to go actually read the definitions and all of the information. We have put it up online so anybody can access it if you want to. Next slide, please. Once you have those definitions, you then got to get them identified. And for us, because this is a distributed model, we used our registrar's office, as was mentioned before, as our central identifying feature. And essentially, we created a spreadsheet, still used today. Every semester, we send it around to all of the department chairs. Now we have built structures in our colleges, so there are IAE-focused individuals in every college who help us sort of organize their work inside of their colleges, and we coordinate closely with them to ensure everything gets done. But ultimately, then this spreadsheet is filled out by the chairs. We think the chairs are the best space for that because they have direct conversations with faculty about what are and aren't HIPs. This, again, is one of the key things about that communication piece. You got to get these definitions all the way down to chairs and faculty so that they know what to code and what not to code, because every course with a particular title does not necessarily get a HIP code to it because they're not necessarily meeting all of the definitional elements. So we spend a lot of time making sure we collect codes properly up front, and then, next slide, please. We had to build out a fairly detailed validation process. Now, I'll tell you right now that this is the thing that got us, had us with a lot of struggle for a while, because we can get to the point where we can code things. Everybody will code them if you ask them to, fairly readily, but they don't spend a lot of time in here unless you force them to. So we, after everything's coded and later on in the semester, actually go through and ask them to go through a validation process. And it's a two-phased process. The first part involves those college structures in which the college goes through and looks at we call them artifacts, right? The syllabi or other learning elements inside the course, and decides whether they meet all of the various elements of a particular definition. So we have a lovely spreadsheet here that we have them fill out. And in that spreadsheet, they just list off fairly readily the characteristics of a HIP structure within, in this particular case, we're looking at some undergraduate research and work-based learning structures. Undergraduate research structures, all of those things. So they try and go through and see whether they met it. So they have a personal understanding of whether they think that's true or not. And then we pass all of that information on to our team of experts at the university, which I coordinate, who go through all of those artifacts and again, look for evidence that they're meeting all of the characteristics. If not, or if there are notes, if there are conversations that need to be followed up, they make note of those things. And then we provide all this information back to the colleges so that they can have conversations with faculty about whether faculty can bring their courses up if they're not meeting expectations, or whether we just need to start removing codes, right? So we are not making any requirements from on high about whether a course gets a code or not. It's up to the colleges to decide how they're going to meet the goals of the IAE. So if an individual course doesn't really want to meet the characteristics of a HIPS program, we are not the arbiters of said conversation. That's fine. We just remove it from the coding, right? So it's up to the colleges to decide how they want to manage all that. This validation process is lengthy and can create some discomfort, but we've done a lot of work to try and make sure that everybody understands where things are at. And we continue to work with this validation process still today. Next slide, please. And then what we do is we've built a series of taxonomies and reflection rubrics to try and think about how we make things better. So meeting the characteristics makes you a high impact practice. How do you make high impact better? Well, there are ways to accomplish that, right? And so we've built out our own taxonomies that think about what are the baselines for high impact, and then how can you make those baselines better? And each of our 3 IAE pillars has their own taxonomy. We also have a common reflection rubric that helps us think through. Remember, one of the key pieces of a high impact practice, especially for us, is being able to reflect on your learning. And so we have reflections as a core feature of every high impact practice. And a common rubric allows us to sort of collect data from that process. Next slide, please. With that, let me turn the floor over to Michele, and he will tell us about how we get faculty there.
Great, thank you so much, Scott. In the next slide, you will see that one of the lessons that we learned early on doing university-wide initiatives is that all these initiatives to be successful require a strong faculty development plan. So we developed one for the QEP. In the next slide, please. Thank you. All right. You get to see some of the goals here of our plan. In particular, yes, thanks. In particular, in this slide, and because we're a little short on time, I want to highlight that one of the goals is to get faculty over the initial hump for HIPs in the previous slide. Yes, right here, thank you. And by initial hump, I mean actually one or two situations where faculty find themselves in. One is that they might see that this is all exciting, but it's going to be a lot of work. Can they do this? Can they do this on top of everything else that is also being highlighted as a priority as we keep moving forward as a university? The second hump is, what do you mean I have to follow these definitions? I have been doing undergraduate research. I have been doing service learning for years now. Is that not enough? Was I doing it wrong? And clearly, we need to communicate that you're not doing it wrong, but that we made a commitment to SACS. And in order for things to qualify for the report, we need to make sure that everybody follows the standardized definitions that a set of faculty and administrators alike and students have taken a lot of time developing them. So in the next slide, you can see all the elements of our faculty development plan. And you'll see some familiar things that come out of centers for teaching and learning, workshops and consultations. I will note a couple things though. The ones with the asterisks are ones where we were able to secure funds from the institution. Yes. And so those are travel funds, faculty learning communities, Coursework design institutes, and a norming session for reflection. Some of these are unusual, so I'll spend a little time on those. The other thing is to note is that this is a comprehensive plan that we actually submitted to SACS COC. So in the next slide, we're going to go through all the elements of the plan. So the next slide has the workshops. And I'm not going to read you all the titles, but you see that we basically created a curriculum for the faculty to go through. And it's not mandatory to go through in lockstep. So if you're focusing on one HIP, you can choose the workshops that relate more to that HIP. A lot of these workshops are done in partnership with the agencies on campus that sort of supervise all those pillars of the QEP. I will also note that each year, the plan changes a little bit. I'm just giving you year one here. And so in the first year, it might be an introduction. In the second year, it's plugging into these initiatives. In the third year, it might be scaling up and so on. We also added a session when Scott came on board for chairs, since we realized their role is so central in getting the faculty on board and in creating the coding structures. So in the next slide, you will see that we also offer consultations. These are just any normal consultation, quote unquote, normal consultation that teaching standards offer, except we sort of tweak the process a little bit to be really focused on things that matter to the It's About Engagement initiative. They follow the 3 C's of consultations. They're confidential, they're collaborative, and they're constructive, meaning they highlight strengths as well as areas for improvement. In the next slide, you will see the elements of a consultation, such as from initial conversations to visiting the class or visiting your online course if you give us access, to talking to the students, make sure the students have a voice in the form of surveys or focus groups, small group instructional diagnosis. And we always follow up with an implementation plan with concrete suggestions that you can implement in the classroom, as well as records. So there's always a written summary memo that serves as documentation. We also, in the next slide, created online resources. We're always adding to the website. There is a specific section in the CITL website where we're adding things that pertain to the It's About Engagement initiative. In particular, we have a teaching resource collective where we highlight a lot of research-based resources, including for HIPs. And right now we just finished and posted a guide to designing a service learning course, as well as links to other resources that exist outside of CITL. Now we get into the funded initiatives. The first one is the travel funds. Obviously, in the next slide, obviously that is suspended for this year, but we were able to secure funds from the institution to send faculty to learn about these pillars and learn how to incorporate them into their courses. And so it's a way to scale up a little bit beyond the faculty that we at CELO can get to. And the next one, number 5, next slide, is the faculty learning communities. Just like we've been offering faculty learning communities, we structured some of them to be focused on the pillars. So 3 FLCs, 1 per pillar: undergraduate research, internships and co-ops, and service learning. And those are funded after you spent the year engaging with the topic, studying, learning, changing your course, implementing, collecting data on how it went. Next year, you get a stipend in professional development funds. We also created course redesign institutes in the next slide. These are all-day, week-long intensives where faculty spend time with us and as well as other professionals on campus and even from off campus, where they receive theory, but they also work consulting with us to redesign their courses. They're usually held in May. They rotate. So far, we've done 1 on graduate research. We've done 1 on service learning. The next one on the slate is internships, and they'll keep rotating through the years. And when you complete the institute and give us your redesigned syllabus and modules, we will, again, this is incentivized, so you'll get the funds. The thing that is a little novel, number 7 in the next slide, is a critical reflection essay rating. So these are the reflections that students fill out at the end of the course, which we use to as data, as evidence for meeting the learning outcomes in the QEP that we will then submit to SAP-COC. Faculty do not score their own reflections in their own course necessarily. Rather, we gather a pool of faculty and we train them in how to rate these reflections using the rubrics that we have developed, using some simulations and some case studies so that we can tweak their grading process to achieve a better integrated reliability. And then we send them off, sort of rating all the reflections that come in at the end of the course in the summer. And after they do that, there is a stipend that is provided upon completion of the work. And finally, and this is new, I don't have much to tell you about this, the next slide, we started a faculty fellow for reflection. Because reflections are so important, both the reflections that students compile at the end of the course, as well as the reflection process for the faculty that are involved in this, in the way they implement things, in the way they incorporate them in their courses, in the way they reflect and keep tweaking and adapting and leveling up. We realized this process was so important that we actually wanted to dedicate more resources. And so we started a fellow, of a CELO faculty fellow for reflection. It inherits from the CELO faculty fellow model, which we've been using for years at CELO, where we borrow somebody for a year-long residency at CELO from the colleges with a halftime release where we give the department replacement funds to replace their courses. We did an internal job search, so the person just started and is building programs so that we can be intentional and effective in our reflective process. So these are all the elements that we have focused on. And as a conclusion, what we have realized is that in the next slide, a couple different things. HIPs are actually energizing to faculty if we can make sure they get over the initial hump, and also if they can feel supported. HIPs are beneficial to students. We get to see this throughout. We get to see it in the reflections. We get to see it everywhere that we poke our head in, and particularly to traditionally underserved groups. There is a challenge, obviously, for our institution, and it's the challenge of scale. It is really challenging to scale up to an institution of 40,000 students. But what we've seen, as Scott has documented with the process that we have adopted, that with the proper institutional support, it is doable. Thank you so much. In the next slide, you will see some references for the things that for the work that we have cited. And in the final slide, you'll see our email addresses. We welcome questions from everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for helping us understand how this can work in a couple of our institutions, and I'm sure that we saw many ways that this can, these processes, these new ideas, these new HIPs can help everyone in the state think differently about how they work HIPs on their own campuses. There's a question here, will the folks presenting be willing to share their slides? If I get a nod, okay, looks like I'm getting a lot of nods. Yes, we'll do that. As a matter of fact, we'll share the slides. We'll have the recording, of course, for the meeting. And I also want to let everyone know, please send me your email questions that you weren't able to get into the queue today. Can we put that last slide back up? Yes, the last slide that has my email address. I'll be happy to triage those and get those to the right presenters, and see to it that we get as many of those questions answered as possible. As you can see, this is a large initiative. We're looking at nothing less than scaling HIPs across the state in a way that not only have we not done before, but no one in the United States has done before. And because of that, there's a lot going on. There are a lot of big efforts in the works at the moment, and we could really only give you a taste of them today. But I hope that you came away from today
Okay, looks like we lost. What an appropriate way to end the session. I think.
Very fitting.
Jonathan, you want to close us out?
No, I think go ahead and Bruce, go ahead and close it out. I just, I mean, I think we're at the closeout point.
Yeah, I'll just close by saying that this afternoon, our HIPS implementation teams will be convening.
Understanding.
There you go, Robert. The HIPS implementation teams will be convening and really jumping into the next phase of the work. So I encourage you, if you don't know who your HIPS implementation team members are, to let us know. We'll be sure to get that list to you and encourage you to collaborate and connect with them as this work moves forward. And with that, I think I'll just go ahead and close out the session and thank all of you for your time today. Much appreciated.
Everyone.